Welcome to Aurora Institute's Symposium 2020 virtual session. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Susan Patrick. I'm the CEO of Aurora Institute, and I'll be facilitating today's session and doing an introduction. As you may know, we shifted our in-person symposium to a virtual convening in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis. We'll be hosting a virtual symposium on October 26th through 28th, so please save the dates. And we're also hosting an all-fall series of webinars and sessions that begin in August and will run through November. They're leading up and following the main conference on key topics. We hope you will join us for our virtual symposium. We have more than 20 sessions over 15 weeks to learn from and participate in. Today's webinar is on increasing capacity for mastery-based learning in Washington State. Washington is identifying barriers to mastery-based learning and proposing recommendations to increase capacity for a mastery-based learning pathway to a diploma. School closures resulting from COVID-19 present an opportunity to rethink how we deliver education and move toward mastery-based education. Participants will hear from cross-sector members of a work group, including a student, representatives from the Legislature, State Senate, State Board of Education, and engage in panelists about applicable lessons learned for other states. We will identify policies and practices that both support and inhibit opportunities for mastery-based learning statewide. Please, next slide. We'd love for you participating to be involved and engaged too. Please use the chat box to introduce yourself. We'll be using the chat to ask questions, comments, and feel free to share resources or any learnings you have on your own mastery-based learning work across the US. At the top of the screen on Zoom, you see view options. You can capture screenshots if needed. If you're on social media, we're on Twitter using hashtag Aurora2020 and at Aurora-INST period. Please feel free to share on social media with your own new networks, peers, and learning communities. Today's sessions will be recorded and archived for free on Aurora Institute Symposium website. We'll send you a follow-up email within the next few days with the slides and recording. And with that, let's begin. On the next slide, I will turn it over to Alyssa Mueller, who will begin and introduce our esteemed panel. Thank you. Alyssa?
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that introduction. So good morning, everyone. At least it's morning in the Pacific Northwest. My name is Alyssa Mueller, and I am the Policy Manager for Career and College Readiness at the Washington State Board of Education. I also provide staff support to the Mastery-Based Learning Workgroup. Next slide, please. I am going to give a short overview of the context of mastery-based learning in Washington State before acting as moderator for this panel of some of the Mastery-Based Learning Workgroup members. Representative Santos, Senator Wellman, Ashley Lynn, Dr. Corey Kelleher, and Dr. Paul Petrie. The intent of the overview is to help you understand the policy context in Washington before the workgroup was created, as well as some preliminary recommendations the workgroup has begun discussing in preparation for their final report due later this fall. We are planning to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. Next slide. In the authorizing legislation for the workgroup, Washington defined mastery-based learning. Some of you might recognize this as Aurora Institute's previous definition for competency-based education. You will also see later in the presentation the workgroup vision, which includes some of the same concepts found in Aurora's updated definition for competency-based education. Next. The workgroup was charged with exploring barriers to mastery-based learning and providing recommendations around how to increase capacity for mastery-based learning, including the development of a mastery-based learning pathway to a high school diploma. Additionally, you'll see the workgroup was charged with two other tasks: learning from the schools in our state that have already begun implementing some form of mastery-based learning, as well as considering improvements in the high school and beyond plan as an essential tool for mastery-based learning. I will briefly overview what Washington's high school and beyond plan policy is on the next slide. Next. I did just want to quickly mention that in Washington, our high school diploma is made up of 3 major components, and the High School and Beyond Plan is one of these. Requirements for a student's high school and beyond plan are laid out in law, and while covering all of those is beyond the scope of this presentation, I would note that my PowerPoint that will be available after today's webinar does include hyperlinks in the notes section for the applicable slide for those that are interested in diving deeper into topics I'll mention throughout the presentation. A high-level summary of the purpose of the High School and Beyond Plan is to serve as a tool to guide the student's high school experience through a plan for high school course taking that is updated periodically and aligns with the student's secondary and post-secondary goals. In preparation for initiating the plan in middle school, each student must first be administered a career interest and skills inventory. The High School and Beyond Plan also helps ensure that each individual student share various opportunities such as dual credit, as well as available interventions and academic support. Can I do a quick check? I'm getting a message my internet connection is unstable. I want to make sure I'm not out. Are we good, or do I need to turn off? Seeing nodding that I'm coming through. Okay, is that right?
It's varying. It's coming in and out a little bit, like your internet connection might be a little slow.
Okay. Okay, I'll turn off video and hopefully this will work a little bit better. Sorry about that. So plan must also include a resume that provides a written compilation. With that quick overview, we're going to dive deeper into who's on the work group. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now that you know a little bit more about the charge to the work group, you will understand how important it was to ensure we had the right mix of expertise and membership. The work group is made up of several legislators who have been huge champions of mastery-based learning, as well as people representing the various levels of our education system, including a local school board member, superintendent, principal, educator, counselor, and student. Various state-level organizations are also represented on the work group, including the State Board of Education, the State Education Department, known in Washington as the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, or OSPI, and then the EOGOAC, which is the legislatively created committee whose charge is to address the opportunity and achievement gap in Washington state. Next slide. The work group truly believes that mastery-based learning is the way to transform our education system to close the opportunity gap. One way of doing this is to ensure we are honoring students' assets and engaging students through their diverse cultures. Mastery-based learning also recognizes that each student's learning happens differently for each. Just as in Aurora Institute's updated definition of competency-based education, where students progress based on mastery and not seat time, our work group agrees that demonstrated mastery of content rather than seat time should be the measure by which students are seen as ready to progress in their learning journey. In the work group's vision for mastery-based learning in our state, students will enjoy relevancy, engagement, and choice in their learning. Because of this, mastery-based learning prepares all students for the workforce of the future by allowing them to experience ownership over their own learning process. Next slide. And then one more time. Thank you. Before the inception of the work group, here are some of the policy conditions that already existed in Washington state. Our state definition of a high school credit is unrelated to seat time. Washington also currently has 15 schools operating under a waiver of credit-based graduation requirements. Most, but not all of these schools operate under the big picture learning model. Washington also has a well-defined policy for providing credit for learning experiences that are conducted outside of school. Various requirements are listed, including that a proposal for how the experience will meet learning standards and how the student will be assessed be approved in advance of the learning experience taking place. There are also some examples of students in Washington being able to advance in learning at a pace that is appropriate for them. For instance, middle schoolers earning high school credit, as well as early college or dual credit programs. The State Board of Education Handbook was created in 2016 as a resource and implementation guide for school district administrators who are interested in expanding opportunities for mastery-based crediting. And then more recently, due to the coronavirus and related school building closures and ongoing disruptions of our educational system, the work group felt it was important to accelerate expansion of mastery-based crediting policies where possible. Because of that, the work group encouraged the State Board of Education to move forward with rulemaking to encourage mastery-based crediting policies that could be helpful to school districts immediately. Therefore, the State Board of Education just adopted new rules at their board meeting a few weeks ago on mastery-based crediting. Those rules outline what a school district's policy for awarding mastery-based credit should contain, including a provision requiring districts to review disaggregated student data to see which subgroups of students are receiving mastery-based credit. If the district finds disproportionality among student groups, the district should be prepared to take appropriate action to ensure equitable access to mastery-based crediting opportunities. The rules also recommend that districts who offer mastery-based crediting make certain categories of demonstration of proficiency available to their students. Some categories the rules recommend districts make available include giving credit for meeting standard on-state assessments, providing local assessment opportunities such as a student design portfolio or a hands-on demonstration of knowledge and skills, as well as equivalency course of study for learning experiences that take place outside of school. One other note, the Washington State School Directors Association has model policies that school boards can adopt that permit mastery-based credit. The world language model policy and procedure have existed for over a decade. And then in response to coronavirus, the State Board and WASDA collaborated to create subject-specific model policies for mastery-based credit in all subjects that have state learning standards. Next slide. So this is a quick graphic representation of some of the programs that I mentioned on the previous slide that already exist in Washington that align well with mastery-based learning, such as accelerated learning opportunities, project-based learning, career and technical education, and learning experiences that take place outside of the school building. Next slide. The State Board of Education annually administers the Basic Education Compliance Survey. Over the past few years, survey results show the number of districts offering mastery-based credit is increasing, and also the number of subjects that it's available in is expanding. And for reference, this is out of 251 high school districts. As you can see, world language is the most popular subject area, probably because of the WASDA model policy I mentioned previously, and because there's an assessment already aligned to state learning standards. Next slide. The work group, and one more, thank you. The work group was created in the 2019 legislative session and has been meeting since last summer. At their meetings, they have heard from a variety of experts and stakeholders in the education system. While the list on the screen is not exhaustive, it does demonstrate some of the types of groups and stakeholders the mastery-based learning work group has been engaging with. The work group reviewed mastery-based diploma framework models from other states across the country. The work group's recommendations around a state-level policy framework for a mastery-based learning diploma are based on what was learned about mastery education and how it's being approached in these other states, and how those components could be adapted to fit Washington's unique context. Next slide. The work group's final report is due December 1st of this year. Although the work group has not yet finalized its recommendations, we wanted to share some of the preliminary thinking that's taken place so far. So some of these possible recommendations that are still under development that may be of interest to those on the call include the importance of learning standards and how they are just as important in a mastery-based model as they are in a traditional credit model. In essence, the vision would be a system where students have multiple opportunities to demonstrate what they know and can do. The work group envisions creating a mastery-based learning diploma pathway where students would demonstrate mastery of the learning standards in multiple subject areas, typically through a multidisciplinary approach that may include classroom experiences, project or work-based learning, or other authentic and personally relevant learning opportunities. Although the work group has made a lot of progress over the past year, this is such important work and the work is not yet done. And so one likely recommendation is also to continue the work group to develop the state profile of a graduate and to make any other recommendations necessary to support implementation of mastery-based learning. The profile of a graduate idea builds on models from other states. Workgroup members particularly appreciated the depth of South Carolina's profile of a graduate model and their accompanying cross-disciplinary competencies. Professional development is also needed for educators to further support the high school and beyond planning process so that this work does not fall completely to counselors. Additionally, for the student's high school and beyond plan, as well as throughout the student's education, the work group has spent a lot of time discussing the importance of partnering with families in authentic and culturally responsive ways. Finally, regarding transcripts, during Washington's transition to an education system that supports mastery-based learning opportunities through both mastery-based crediting and path-based mastery-based diploma, students should still have access to the traditional high school transcript until higher education institutions better understand mastery-based learning. However, workgroup members do strongly support the use of a mastery-based learning transcript that more authentically demonstrates student learning, such as the transcript developed by the Mastery Transcript Consortium that I'm sure some of those on the call are probably familiar with. Next slide. So as a reminder, the slide deck will be available on Aurora Institute's website soon. But I wanted to just have a slide that lists some of the resources that I've mentioned throughout the presentation today and a link to the Mastery-Based Learning Workgroup's webpage where additional resources are available. So with that, this concludes my overview presentation. I have included my contact information on the final slide. Please do feel free to reach out to continue the discussion around mastery-based learning anytime. So at this point, we are going to be turning off the slides to have a panel discussion with the work group members. We encourage folks who are comfortable to turn on their videos, as we'd love to see your reactions, and we'll be doing pulse checks throughout, asking you to use your react buttons, which you can find on the toolbar on the bottom of your Zoom screen in response to various parts of the conversation. So to kick off our discussion, panelists, please introduce yourselves and share your why for engaging in this work. Representative Santos, would you like to start perhaps?
Thank you so much, Alyssa. Good morning again from Washington to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Sharon Tomiko Santos. I serve in the Washington State House of Representatives, a position that I've held since 1999. Currently chair the House Education Committee, and I have been very fortunate in this capacity to work with a variety of organizations, including the Aurora Institute. I know KnowledgeWorks is on this webinar, but primarily through my professional organization, the National Conference of State Legislatures. I've had the good fortune to work with Sunny Day and Michelle Ekstrom to do deep dives into what makes some of the most competitive education systems in the world so competitive. And one of the things that I was able to really grasp and I guess hold deep is the notion of mastery-based learning versus sort of the passive seat time based learning. And one of the reasons it attracted me so much is because, like many educational systems throughout these United States, one of the greatest challenges we have is ensuring that the educational opportunity gap for so many students of color are not being dealt with in an effective way. And mastery-based learning, I think, is the pathway to ensure that every student receives the type of individualized education that honors the assets, as Alyssa mentioned, that they bring into the system. Thank you.
Senator Wellman, perhaps you'd like to go next?
Certainly, thank you so much. And I'm delighted to be here today and see so many people who are really committed to this work. And it is work. I think I'd like to share a little bit about my background. Senator Lisa Wellman, I've just finished my first term as a senator running for re-election, and I've been chair of early learning K-12 education for the past 3 years. Going back into my background, first of all, that although my degree is in education, I have changed and spent the majority of my time in technology. My education started in higher education at Antioch College, which was a work study group. So I understand and in fact have embraced mastery-based education. Not only was I attending college, but I was working in amazing positions as a second grade teacher, as an aide in a hospital, as an aide in a mental institution, having some real experiences and understanding what I would be doing as a teacher, as somebody who was out there in the real world. I was getting to do it. So I've always appreciated mastery-based education. I changed into tech. I was a CEO of a number of different companies, and I was also vice president at Apple Computer. And I think that that's relevant to what we're talking about today, because I understand the changes that have taken place in our economy, what technology has brought about as far as our economy, and why our traditional system that we've been laboring under, which has been aligned with an industrial society, really doesn't work for what we need as CEOs, as people who are running companies that have such a huge percentage of technology embedded in it. One of the things we heard last year at the Aurora Institute conference, which was amazing and wonderful, hearings from so many communities about how they would bring about these changes, what came through really clearly was the fact that the community needed to be supportive. It's not just all the changes that happen in the background that our State Board of Education makes, our Office of the Superintendent of Instructions, that we do in the local districts. But the really community has to accept and embrace it. And I think that that's one of the things that's so very important. That was something that we were engaged in somewhat before COVID. But all of a sudden, one of the really profound things that happened because of COVID, and because suddenly education was online, much of education was not in a school building. It was not with a teacher in the front of a room. It was not kids sitting in seats. It was different. And people really began to see it for themselves that education, learning takes place everywhere. And that's a very exciting basic concept that we're talking about when we talk about mastery-based education. So to the extent that we're not going to let a good crisis go to waste, COVID has really transformed people's understanding of where learning takes place, and we're going to leverage that. We're also very lucky in our state. One thing, although we don't have the broadband that we would like to support every student, and that is an equity issue. It's a serious equity issue. We're very lucky in that our Constitution has said that education is our paramount duty. And so we will also leverage that to grow our broadband system to make sure that every child everywhere has the environment that they need, the best environment we can offer them, with devices, with connectivity, with affordable connectivity, wherever they may be. And so it gives us the opportunity now to bring together a number of things that I think will facilitate the work that we're doing, that Representative Santos has worked on for so many years and has really led groundbreaking change in our state. And so the time is now, and what we are doing will help our students, I absolutely believe, be ready for a 21st century economy, to engage in that productively. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Wellman. Paul, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hello, my name is Paul Petrie, and I am a member of the State Board of Education for the state of Washington. I'm also Chancellor of Washington State University, Everett, which is the newest campus within the Washington State University system. I'm also an associate professor of educational leadership. And so I've been at Washington State University for about 15 years. And in my current role, I haven't been publishing that type of thing, but in terms of my research interest and my passion, it really focuses on issues of access to higher education, P20 educational policy, which is focused on connecting the different levels of education kind of closely in order to facilitate students' transitions, and also college choice, which is just how students go about choosing whether or not they will attend college. And then so mastery-based learning is something that is of interest to me because of its ability to really focus on engaging those students who have traditionally been disengaged. And I think that's a real power of mastery-based learning and what it can bring to an educational system. The other thing that I think is really important, this is something that Dr. Pedro Noguero mentioned at the Aurora Institute meeting that I attended this past year, is the focus on deep learning. And I think that's another powerful aspect of mastery-based learning and engage in what will help to engage students. One of the things that we were fortunate enough to be able to do was to have some conversations with students. And one of the things that struck me is that some of the students were very bright students that were engaged with mastery-based learning. And some of them were pretty clear that if they weren't able to bring who they are to the classroom, if they aren't able to learn about things that are relevant to their lives, things that are relevant to their world, then they just weren't interested. And so I think that that is the type of student that mastery-based learning is able to really bring into the educational process. And I think that's something that's very important. The other piece that I think is very important is connecting mastery-based learning to college and career. And I think that's a very important feature to what we're doing in the state of Washington. And I think it's gonna be very fruitful for us moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Corey, how about you go ahead and go next?
Wonderful, thank you. I would love to. Good morning, everyone, and well done to Alyssa, great job, and well done to the work group members. Thanks, everyone. My name is Corey Callahar, and I've been a high school administrator for the past 14 years, and then I taught 10 years prior to that. So I'll be speaking today from the practitioner perspective mostly. My interest and experience working with mastery-based learning truly came from my time in the classroom and working with my colleagues to create non-traditional pathways to earn credit in social studies and English language arts. And so my passion kind of came out of frustration. So my frustration is that when we were doing this work in the late 90s, early 2000s, I feel like we were looking at it completely wrong. We were looking at it as how do we create really challenging curriculum where students end up choosing to stay in the classroom. And so it's like we're almost protecting our jobs for some reason. And it was just the backwards way of looking at this. I don't think we understand conceptually what mastery-based learning is. When I moved into the administration, I kind of took that frustration with me and spent a lot of time trying to open the door to making these opportunities more realistic, more accessible, and to get them in the hands of teachers, predominantly teachers, department heads, people that can kind of move the initiative through the system and then parents and students as well, because it really felt like if our constituents know that these opportunities are available, they're going to help us fight to get these into the classroom and into the hands of the students. And again, we made some great progress in the Wenatchee area, but I still was a little bit frustrated because a lot of the programs we put into place ended up in the gifted and talented area or in the enrichment area. And I'm like, no, that's not what we're trying to do here. So since then, in the last 10 years, I've been working in alternative education, where these concepts and opportunities have just been fully embraced in a variety of ways. And so that's been a really great collaborative breath of fresh air. And I think that there is no worry about, I mean, the job security thing is just not a worry as far as making alternative curriculum or a mastery-based curriculum that works for kids. And so that's been really powerful. And I think and hope a reason why I ended up on this work group is because of that work that we've been trying to leverage in the Wenatchee area. The focus clearly is on mastery of the learning and the specified targets, and ultimately the outcomes for kids. I'm a huge advocate for, once again, hopefully opening the floodgates of creative thinking, project-based learning to impact our students. And I'm really excited for this group today to meet and hear from Ashley, who's kind of become the pride of our little work group team. So you'll hear from Ashley next, I think.
See, Corey, you could moderate for me. You took the words right out of my mouth. Our absolutely most important voice on our work group is Ashley, our student member. So Ashley, you want to share your why with those folks listening in today?
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa and Corey. So hey everyone, my name is Ashley Lynn. I am a senior from Union High School in Vancouver, Washington. And I kind of just bring a student voice to the table as a representative from the Association of Washington Student Leaders. But I think I'm interested in mastery-based learning because I'd say like for 80% of my life, school was something that happened to me. Like I didn't feel like I had any power over, like what I learned and like how I learned, until I kind of was exposed to these incredibly powerful like career and technical education and work-based learning experiences, which made learning so much more relevant to me and showed me that like people value the ways that I learn outside of the classroom and they value what I bring to the table. I think one of the best examples of this was in my sophomore year of high school, when I was able to kind of take this year-long college level research class where I was able to design and implement my own research study. I got to choose a topic. It was about like school business partnerships for work-based learning. I chose my research methodology. I was able to manage my own time. And I think it was through that experience where like I kind of learned so much, and I felt like I was part of an education system that gave me a sense of agency and really trusted me to take responsibility for my learning. And I think that is why I'm so drawn to mastery-based learning. I want other students to be able to feel that sense of agency as well. I think our traditional like curriculum and assessments often promote like just a really narrow view of like what counts as desired ways of like speaking and like knowing and acting. And I think we're teaching students to value signal, and that numbers are the only ways that someone grows. And I think we need to broaden what counts for students. And I really see mastery-based learning as a tool to help us do that.
Thanks, Ashley. So let's move on to our next question. What problem is the work group trying to solve? What policies and practices are currently supporting and disincentivizing opportunities for mastery-based learning in our state? And I'm just going to open it up to whichever work group member wants to jump in first.
I guess I'll start, and I will specifically make sure that we put front and center some of the challenges that our society is facing right here, right now. And when we talk about the intersections between the challenges that we have in a COVID environment, everything has moved online, as Senator Wellman has so well articulated and championed in the legislature. When we talk about Black Lives Matter and the fact that the education system, you know, when we think about the ESEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, that was the first major topical civil rights legislation that came out of after 1965, the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And then thirdly, the economic challenges that we are going to face. This is a significant cabal of issues that we have to face. And if we don't prepare each and every student in these United States to be able to find their way through this, then our nation, our economy, our society will be in trouble. And so one of the things that I have for the last 22 years in the legislature tried to bring forward is the fact that the education system is failing our students. Our students are not failing in the education system. And I'm reminded very much of, again, the fact that our education system is intending to devoid students of their individual experiences, their individual interests, and their individual assets, and rather to put them much more in line with the sort of the environmental context in which our education system was created into this assembly line approach where everybody comes out the same way. I am reminded, for example, of another student that I have met along the way who was very, very powerful in her assertions after a conference that was specifically aimed at in integrating the Pacific Islander families into the education system. And this young lady stood up at the end of the day and said and it took a lot of courage because Pacific Islanders are, their culture is one that deeply respects elders, that deeply respects educators. And the fact that this young lady, first of all, stood up, and then what came out of her mouth was, I want to say that my identity, my family, and my community are not barriers to my education, and I do not want the education system to treat them as a problem. I think that that's a very, very powerful statement that says that we all have to turn the mirror towards us, ourselves, and figure out what is it in the system. And that those things include a lack of cultural competency and responsiveness. They include a design system that is based on seat time rather than valuing all of the education that takes place outside of the classroom. It includes things like the lack of opportunities, I think, as Corey mentioned, for students to really be engaged and to really develop that ownership and agency, as Ashley mentioned, and instead really focuses still on the rote learning approach. And that's not going to work if we want to build a 21st century society, a 21st century economy, and balance all of these interests that are now coming to the fore in this day and age.
I certainly second and third what Representative Santos just talked about. It is one of our key issues. We have been, if you just look at our graduation scores, et cetera, you'll see that we've been leaving 20% of our kids behind. And the issues of equity are front and center and exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. It has brought to the fore so much. And so everything playing on top of what Representative Santos has said. But as a business person, let me also say that for years we have been saying that when we're looking for an employee, we can show them how to run that thing. But what we can't do is we can't give them good critical thinking skills. We can't help them to be collaborative. They have to come in the door with that. They have to be good communicators and understand. They have to have time management skills. They have to be ready to be an employee and to participate on some level. And one of the things that brought this home to me was being down at one of our places of business in the Vancouver area, Shin-Etsu. Shin-Etsu makes silicone plates for the high-tech industry. And they have been first and foremost in participating in our programs of mastery-based learning. When they bring students into their plant, they have very specific jobs for them. They're not there to sit around and look around and, oh, is this what an office looks like? Or is this what a factory looks like? Or something else. They have a plan of learning that they are tied to and that they are mentored to accomplish. And when I spoke with some of the students, one of the things that was really so impactful for me was to hear her say, when I asked her how was the experience, you know, what did you get out of it? And she said, well, you know, I accomplished what they gave me in terms of what that task was and what I was going to learn. I felt really good about that. She said, I don't know that I want to work here when I graduate high school, but I never thought I could work in a place like this. I never saw myself as having these skills, as being able to be accomplished. And now I know I could. And now I know I can. And to me, that's what we're really working for, is to have every student who did not see themselves as accomplished, as having agency, who didn't see themselves. And if you can't see yourself, you can't do it. And so this is an amazing, I can't think of anything that we could be giving our children, you know, through the education system, more than a knowledge that, yes, I can do that, I can be that. And I think that that's something that's going to stay with them the rest of their lives. The other thing I think that is really important, and we haven't mentioned it yet, but as somebody who has been in marketing, even though it's tech marketing, but messaging is important. And let's face it, people, we have been telling parents for years that the only way forward was a 4-year college degree. And now we see so many people who have spent an awful lot of money and are in a lot of debt for a 4-year college degree that doesn't necessarily give them the opportunities or the job that they want. It was also very important to hear from business who said, you know, when I get a transcript from somebody who's applying for a job out of college or a high school even, they took X and they got an ABC, whatever. I don't know anything about what they learned other than they could take a test and get A, B, C, or D. But when I get this portfolio of activity from somebody who has been through a mastery-based system, I know that person. I know what they're capable of, and the image that I have is so much more complex, so much more accomplished, that I feel that I can integrate them more successfully into that next step. So I think it's again, continuing on about where we are and what mastery base gives, it's huge.
Absolutely, and well said, Senator Wellman. I just had a couple of other things to add here. I just really think that, you know, to piggyback on what all has been said, we're trying to create that authentic and engaging option for students in the time that as teachers and educators, as parents, community members, employers, we are fighting against the easily accessible opportunities for brain space. You know, like there are so many distractions in our world. These high-tech computers that are in our pockets are just, we battle for brain space for this. And so I know that it's challenging, you know, for a large traditional 4A high school to think in terms of mastery-based learning, you know, holistically and for all students, but we really are excited about getting this legislation and these opportunities in front of building leadership so that they can really work with their staffs and their department heads and honestly, the early adopter teachers in our programs that are going to take this and run with it, because we need it. And it needs to not just be in our gifted and talented programs. It needs to be for all students, and even starting for our most underrepresented populations, level the playing field for our students, individualize that educational experience, extend opportunities for more robust learning, And as Senator Wellman said, critical thinking and that collaboration skills that we can't always gauge, they're ingrained in this type of learning. And one thing that's been great about working in a remote scenario, as we have for the last little bit, is our student population, who I will stereotypically say a lot of times students at Westside High School, they kind of want to be left alone. I want to put my hood up. I want to have my work in front of me, and I just want to get my work done in a place where I'm comfortable and I feel well cared for by compassionate adults. We're seeing a little bit of a shift in the Zoom world, and I think there's this need for communication in some sort of social outlet there, and they're asking their teachers, put me in a breakout room with some other students so I can work on stuff and we can figure out things together. And it's a great opportunity to do that type of work, and just to move our students in that perspective and build some of those skill sets. So like I've said, I'm really excited for the door to be opened in Washington State and other states to follow, as we have followed other states as well, but just to get this out there and in front of our students. So thank you for the time.
I would just add that I think it's important for our education system to evolve. One of the things that Representative Tomiko Santos mentioned is just this kind of industrial model of education. And in the state of Washington, especially, there's a knowledge-based economy. You know, we have to evolve, and our education system has to evolve with us. And you know, this focus on units of education, you know, these, you know, 45-minute blocks of education, that's probably not something that is sustainable over the long haul, given where we're headed in terms of a state and our economy. So I think that's very important. The other thing I think is really important, and Corey touched on this a little bit, is that for us that we integrate this kind of focus on diversity and inclusion within our model. And one of the things that we learned from the New York Consortium is that you really have to integrate that early on, because it's easy for something like mastery-based learning to become the next AP, IB, you know, that type of thing. So that's going to be something that's very important for us as we move forward.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess kind of to add on to what has been said, I think one of, you know, I think there are a lot of like policies and practices that exist that support mastery-based learning in our state, right? But I think there is also a problem of like, how do we communicate that to students and families? And how do we make sure that people know that these opportunities are there for them? I mean, like when I think about, you know, if I went to my school and asked just a random student, like, what does learning mean to you? Like the answer I would probably get is like, oh, it means like, you know, I show up every day to class, like I'm not tardy, like you know, I'm there for like the full class period. And I think like there's just this very like rigid kind of, because we've been telling students and we've been telling their families that, you know, like to learn means like you go to class and you like take 24 credits and like you pass all your classes. And I think part of the work is also like, how do we communicate what we're doing with students to make sure that people, you know, have a broader definition of learning that is not like based on seat time, and that is and that really considers their lived experiences and who they are, like both in the classroom but also outside of the classroom as well.
Can I just say one more thing, if I might, because I'm listening to this, and let's not forget about the issues about educators. And, you know, for quite a long time, people went to school to learn to be teachers. Frankly, I did, and I was very excited about all the creativity that I could bring to being a teacher. And then I was in a classroom, and it wasn't about my creativity at all. And so we do have an issue with teachers who suddenly are being thrown into this new teaching environment. Now, before COVID, it was the teacher who has been for 20 years teaching in a classroom in that traditional system that Ashley talked about. And so our leading edge, if you will, was these new schools that were being set up with teachers who wanted to go into those environments. And it was going to be quite a bit, I think, a bit of time before we brought along the rest of the establishment. However, overnight, we've had to have a new way of teaching because the classroom is not there. It's very different. And I know Corey has been on the forefront of professional development for our teachers over this summer, which, as we've listened to the teachers talk about it, has been liberating beyond belief. It has really given them excitement about the profession, about how they can engage with students. It's a challenge, there's no question about that. This is not easy, trying to keep kids, excited and invested when you're not physically with them. There's no energy coming back and forth. As I'm looking at all your faces, there's just nothing happening. It's just, I get to see you, but I'm an adult. For kids, there's a lot missing. So we have to be very creative. We have to find ways to excite them from where they are. And Corey, maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about the professional development, because I think that we haven't done the training for everybody, but I think it was really significant for so many teachers.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator Wellman. Yeah, the professional development opportunities have been huge during this time, and it almost feels like it's if we had to do it over again, we would do things differently. But in a state of emergency and crisis, you do what you can, and so we have leveraged, at least in our school district, leveraged a lot of work. And it's kind of been threefold, the work that we've been doing with professional development. One of those obviously is technology. How do you work with the technology? How do you use the technology and leverage the technology to engage, and also in many different stances to help motivate some students as well. And then the other piece of some of the professional development that has been happening is how do you work on robustly developing unit planning and designing units with the end intent and the mastery-based learning standards that you want to use during that time. And then the third prong of what we've been doing for professional development has been social emotional learning and trauma response. And so this is one of the unique experience for a lot of us adults and educators who have been, we understand the trauma that our students bring to the table, understand the toxic stress that they sometimes live in, but for the first time we can actually discuss, maybe not the first time, but for a real time, we can discuss and talk about how the pandemic has affected all of us to a certain degree. And that's a unique opportunity to really leverage with our students and a great conversation builder. I think a great place to share vulnerability and to encourage students to do the same. So I hope I addressed what you were looking for, Senator Wellman, with that response.
Thank you, yes.
Before we move to the next question, I also want to hop in and just emphasize a couple of things. One, I saw a reminder in the chat room from somebody following Ashley's comments about how we've built a system of compliance. And I think Senator Wellman correctly expanded it from just being students who are trained to be compliant creatures. And the way we create that system is by focusing on attendance, not on content of what the student has actually learned. And that's an important, I think, point to illuminate that both our students and our staff, who, especially those young teachers, who may have all that great joy and enthusiasm of working with young people and want to encourage that kind of creativity and innovation, and they come into the actual system and find we have to do this because accountability creates a necessity for complying with this rule. And so I also wanted to just focus on a point that Corey made about the system that we have before us and why it's vital. It is morally necessary for us to rethink, reimagine education. And that is the idea that our current system, in order to meet accountability goals, requires that we segregate systems, that we create these opportunities for, again, what we call the gifted or advanced student. But at the same time, then, what we have to create are these other systems that support remedial learning or special education. And that creates a mindset of being segregated, of being otherized. And I think that that is, and I speak as the daughter of a special education teacher, we should adopt the mentality that each and every student, no matter what the assets are that they bring in, because everyone is going to have some assets and everyone is going to have some challenges, not deficiencies, but challenges. And we have to recognize that every individual's opportunity to advance is going to be based on their engagement and involvement and their agency over their own education. And so I just really want to bring in that idea that the system we have right now, especially so focused on accountability, and we have to ask whose measure of accountability, what values are in there, but it's also designed to segregate students. And I think that that is a really unconscionable outcome of our system.
Thank you, Representative Santos. It sounds like we're ready to transition to our next question, which is, although our work group won't finalize our recommendations until later this fall, what preliminary recommendations are you most excited about? And perhaps this is also an opportunity to address a question I saw in chat that said, beyond teacher development and policy, are there other areas needed to support effective and equitable mastery-based learning?
Thanks, Alyssa. I'll jump in here. I don't believe I have anything overly profound to share, but I did see Rhett's question in there, and it struck me as a great question. Like, that is really, let's get down to brass tacks here and talk about what needs to be done. And the thing that there are a variety of different avenues I think that we could take to answer that question, as well as what we are preliminarily excited about. And so I want to repeat what I had said before and answer both questions kind of. And I wrote it in the chat too. I really believe that from a practitioner standpoint, high school principal, whether I was in the alternative program now or the traditional 4A high school with 2,000 students, it's still, we need to have a process or a system in place, I think, so the educational leaders can take a concept like mastery-based learning and roll it out to their department leaders and to the teachers who are progressive and are grabbing onto some of the best practices that we have, and working with their PLCs to really get this out there and to help it impact students, help it change education, help it increase test scores, help it increase motivation and learning. But if we don't have a process or a system to roll it out, that I think it'll stop on someone's desk and it won't make it to the place where it needs to. And that's in the hands of the educational practitioners who are willing to think outside the box, think outside the classroom, and move away some of that pre-made curriculum and just dive into some mastery-based learning. So I'm excited about that. That's part of my passion and my why. But I also am still perplexed as to what that looks like.
Sorry, I'm still trying to find the mute button and unmute button. I think the thing that is most exciting to me is the recommendation to continue the mastery-based learning work group, first of all. I have been trying to push this in Washington State for many years, and obviously it really felt like a boulder that I was trying to push up a hill by myself. What I find most gratifying about what is going on right now is it's not that other people didn't have enthusiasm for mastery-based learning. In fact, we found places like Wenatchee that were actually practicing mastery-based learning, but they too were doing so in their own sort of sense of isolated silos. And I think the work group has, first of all, knitted together individuals who are enthusiastic about mastery-based learning, who do see this as an opportunity for transformation of our system, to come together and to educate other people so that it is more of a movement, but to do so by focusing in on the profile of a graduate. We need that as our way to communicate both to students, to their families, to the practitioners in the field, and to the employers across the state, so that we're all talking of the same common language and we can all understand the value of mastery-based learning is in creating people who never stop learning and who recognize that the skills that they are developing in the K-12 system are actually the skills and the knowledge that form the basis of a lifelong learner. That you have those critical thinking skills, that you have those investigative research skills, that you have the capacity and the permission to be creative and innovative in your thinking and to be willing to try things out. I think one of the things that I learned on a visit to some of the mastery-based schools in Idaho was just this picture in a classroom that focused on the thought that the best teacher is failure. And it gave students the opportunity, the permission to just try things out and say, a mistake is not learning. It actually is deeper learning.
I'll also piggyback on again, what Representative Santos was talking about. One of the things that I'm most excited about is that we are getting so much support from the state, from others in the state, both parents, teachers, professionals, the business community. We're all seemingly coming together, which is really quite necessary for this to work to the greatest extent possible. And I will also say, you mentioned, Representative Santos, about lifelong learning. Very frankly, people, we've talked about this for years, and it's a crock. It just is not. You know, if you look at the number of people who've even opened a book after they graduate from high school, because nobody made them, it hasn't been happening. And yet, the 21st century economy really means that you are going to be having numerous careers in the course of your lifetime. You are going to be constantly recertifying within any career. You can be a plumber. The equipment is going to change. We can assure that. And so you have to be prepared to have the skills really to take that on. And I do think that, again, to what we've been talking about, that foundation that we're hoping to provide our young people with through mastery-based education, or really any way that they need to learn. I mean, will this be for everyone? There may be some people who really, really like being in a classroom learning, and that's okay. That's fine. We can't say that everybody has to now go in this direction, but there are many things that I think that we're adding to our understanding of what will help people succeed as people, as part of our society, as citizens of our country, which we really want to, make part of why we're in school at all, or why we're going through this education process.
I have something I'm really excited about. I'm excited about our focus on the high school and beyond plan. I mean, what could be more fundamental to a student's success than them having a plan for their future? I mean, it's just fantastic. And then so I think that tying mastery-based learning to the high school and beyond plan elevates mastery-based learning, and it also elevates the high school and beyond plan. And so what we're hoping to do is to make it so that the high school and beyond plan will now be integrated into the core curriculum through English language arts. And I just think that that's going to be really a game changer for our student population in developing their plans for the future. So that I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I can't agree more with Dr. Petrie. I think, like what a lot of people have said, like I think successful mastery-based learning is where students kind of come out, well, students graduate being lifelong learners and having a post-high school plan that makes sense for them. And I think I think the high school and beyond plan is that kind of tool that fills the missing gap between, what are students doing like in school to like what are students doing in the future, and being able to communicate that to students and their families, right? And I'm just really excited about kind of making improvements to the high school and beyond plan as a critical tool for mastery-based learning. I think there's so much power in helping students being able to like author their identity, right? Being able to clarify like, their strengths, their passions, their long-term goals, and be able to share that with educators so we can kind of all make sure we're on the same page in helping students move towards a vision for the future that they see for themselves. And yeah, I just, like we have recommendations around like how can we support school counselors and train educators on how they can help make this whole process of filling out the high school and beyond plan less transactional, because I think there's a lot of, I think right now, at least my experience with the high school and beyond plan is like, like we spend a day on it, like I fill out a quiz, like it tells me what I'll be in the future. And like, I don't think that is necessarily like the values that we want to, instill in the education system. So yeah, I'm just really excited to explore different ways of how can we make sure that the high school and beyond plan really does put students and their families in the driver's seat and allows students to, personalize what their learning journey looks like for them. Yeah, it's just really excited to see where this can go.
Yeah, it needs a home in the curriculum.
Absolutely well said. And I think that's the problem of practice as well, is if your school does not particularly have an advisory program or a time built into the schedule, it comes down to pacing guides and it comes down to curriculum restraints, and we don't have enough time to get all of our but all of our learning targets accomplished. It really does present a problem. And then to Ashley's point, it becomes like a checklist that is sent out in an email or via Remind or something like that. And it really loses that authenticity that you need. And I also think that it loses the celebration of what the student wants to do. And I think that's a very human process. We have to celebrate that. It's like, yeah, that is awesome. You would be so good at that. And I can just see, you can see our students light up when they talk about what's next, or even if it's an I don't know, like, that's okay. Let's come up with a few ideas. And so right on, Dr. Petrie, if it doesn't have a home, it's not going to be as authentic as we want it. And in our larger high schools, our counseling teams that have 400 and 500 students that they are responsible for couldn't possibly, manage that. So I am too very excited about the high school and beyond plan. And there are great examples of wonderful high school and beyond plans that are happening throughout the state, and how schools have embraced it and really led to some student ownership. So that will be great.
And I have to totally agree and say that I think what mastery-based learning has the opportunity to do is to uplift the high school and beyond plan to what it was intended to be in the first place. What Ashley is describing is, again, what she earlier referred to as sort of a compliance notion. Because it is a requirement of high school graduation, school districts and schools will not do this. But the question is, are they using it in such a fashion that it does engage the student? That's how you get student engagement, is by discussing what the high school and beyond plan is, and by arranging the type of coursework that this student might engage in based on his or her interests and where her her strengths are, where his areas of challenge might be. And again, all of it comes to this process of learning that is not just about shoving information into a brain, but really awakening the senses and awakening the sort of the personality of each student, and giving them the tools and the space to be able to practice. And that, I think, is the most important thing, is the ability to practice critical thinking, the ability to practice organization, the ability to practice the hands-on opportunities. And again, that's another piece that I'm very excited about, is not every student is a book learner. So in fact, so many of our students, I would argue almost all of our students, get that deeper learning by actually hands-on practicing what they are learning. And so I think as we move away from this notion of just education as being academics and being spoon-fed into a real experiential focus of teaching and learning, we really then change the sort of the axis on which education system is built.
And if I might, building upon all of this, one of the things that with the high school and beyond plan, so we haven't really talked about, is how we are pushing it down into the school, into middle school, and looking at it as an exploration of opportunities, of things that somebody is interested in. It's not just a question of what you're going to do with 4 years of high school. And probably it should be pushed down into kindergarten and first grade, and look at explorations. I have been, for 14 years now, I've been a mentor at the University of Washington Foster School of Business with the MBA program. These are people who I would tell you would be considered by anybody to be quite accomplished, who have done what they set out to do, very well educated. And one of the things that constantly amazes me is when they come to me to be a mentor and we have opportunities to talk, and I ask them, where's your passion? What is it that you're doing? That's not something that they've talked about. They've not really examined it. It's not, I'm doing this because this is really what excites me. Now, granted, I will tell you that many people don't have the opportunity economically to do what excites them. They do what they do because sometimes it's paying for healthcare. Sometimes it's just putting food on the table. And not everybody has an opportunity to do something that is their passion. But that so many people really don't know what excites them and what really gets them out of bed in the morning, not to do work, because it doesn't, there's no such thing as work. They're doing something that they love doing and are making a life out of it. And I think that that's something that's worth investing in.
Well said.
Yeah, very well said.
Alyssa, I'll jump in. This is Susan. And
yes,
just there was a question earlier, and it ties to this idea that Senator Wellman's bringing up, which is the question is it accurate to say mastery-based learning is a pathway to ensuring equity? And we've actually published some resources, in fact, a guide to competency-based education with equity strategies, because it is important to look at the structures in our system to ensure equity, that we're not ranking and sorting and giving some students agency and not giving other students agency. It's important to look at the pedagogy. It's important to look at whether it is culturally responsive and lifting up the assets that students bring and having a strengths-based focus. And it's also really important to look at not just the structure and the pedagogy, but the overall culture. Is there a growth mindset? Do we believe and understand what the research tells us about student learning, that all students can learn? And are we designing around that learning sciences? So this idea, and I've seen this as we've studied at Aurora, global education systems, and that work that NCSL and Sunny Day is doing, that Representative Santos was lifting up, is critical. the high performing education systems, including systems like New Zealand and others, have started with a new definition of success. So this idea of what do we want students to know and be able to do in the graduate profile. And it includes this idea of purpose, of connected, caring citizens, and building knowledge and skills with that and having them articulated. Well, one thing that I've seen is in a mastery-based learning environment, you're asking students to set their goals every day, to set those skills, but also think about the pathways throughout life. What are your goals? And it doesn't mean you're tracked into something, you're not, but you're opened up to what are the different pathways that are possible and how can I continue to build on that knowledge and skills, and that every student is supported and asked about their goals, but also supported to reach those different goals. So the question, is it accurate to say mastery-based learning is a pathway to ensuring equity? You've done a lot of work in Washington State on pathways. How do you think about this question broadly?
You know, I think, thank you, Susan. My work in Washington State in the field of education is that trying to transform a system is very difficult work, very, very difficult work. And so we have laid many pathways to do some of the transformative work in Washington State, including the Educational Opportunity Gap Oversight and Accountability Committee, which is a statutory committee created by the legislature that very specifically is there to provide guidance and oversight and monitoring of systemic change to specifically address opportunity gaps for students of color. I cite that because we have been engaged, so I'm a member of both, as is Senator Wellman, and wearing our EOG OAC hats, I'm going to say we have been engaged in the mastery-based learning movement. And let me give you a specific example. This committee went up to visit the Lummi tribe, one of the 29 federally recognized tribes in the state of Washington. And I hope that Senator Wellman will also talk about her story and experience with the tribes post or in the midst of COVID. Our visit obviously was pre-COVID. And the thing that we were able to really focus in on is by focusing on standards as opposed to credits. This Lummi tribe was able to incorporate as the cornerstone, the centerpiece really of their work, the history, the culture of Native Americans and specifically their tribe. And so the example I often give is a real example, a former member of our EOG OAC, Senator John McCoy, who came with me to my first conference with Aurora Institute when you were still called INACOL. His story involved his grandchild who was enrolled in a public school in his district. And this child was being enrolled in kindergarten. And one of the things that they were doing was trying to assess whether or not a child understood different animals and could distinguish between different animals. And so they came across this one picture of a large black and white mammal that lives in the sea. And the teacher asked, "Can you tell me what this is called?" And the student said, using, I can't pronounce the word, the native name for this mammal, because in the Tulalip tribal nation, they recognize this particular black and white mammal as a family member. So he used the family member name. And the teacher said, "No, you're wrong." The next thing he said was, "Well, maybe she means this is an orca." And he used the Latin designation for this large black and white mammal. And the teacher said, "No, you're wrong." And finally, he said, "Do you mean that this black and white mammal is a whale?" And she said, "Yes, you're right. This child gave her 3 names, 3 accurate names for this black and white mammal, which shows that the system needs to adapt to community. The other example I often use, and I won't go into great detail, but to say, think about a canoe journey. That's very common in our Salish seas of the Pacific Northwest. If every student were to engage in a canoe journey that begins with the history of the tribe, and then goes to how do you recognize the science and the biology of the materials that you will be using. And then when you create a canoe, you're using mathematical concepts so that you have actually a structure that is going to be functional. And then when you launch that canoe and go on your canoe journey, you're going to have to be able to learn something about astronomy. You're going to have to need to know something about tides. If you are going to actually have this canoe journey complete its end accomplishment with the student being able to survive on whatever he or she can find in the sea. That is an example of culturally responsive curriculum that incorporates history, that incorporates an understanding of biology and other scientific methodologies, that understands mathematics, and is totally functional. And that is when we have a perfectly operating mastery-based system. It honors our students, it honors the communities they come from, and it accomplishes the idea of standards-based education.
Thank you. That is one of the most profound and excellent examples that I've heard. And this is what you start to see when you go to truly mastery-based environments, that students are really setting up challenges or parts of their learning that are connected to community, to their sense of self, and they're able to do it in an interdisciplinary way and map back those standards in an articulated way to show what they know, to show what they can do, and have that be really transferable, true learning how to learn. Thank you for that.
And I also talk about, when we were talking about equity and equity surrounding this, one of the issues that has been challenging to me that I focused on is, well, what if you live in a place, you're in a rural community where the main industry that you're involved in is agriculture? And it involves, kind of crops, and much of that today has many areas of technology. We now see almost autonomous driven tractors, controlled by GPS and things like that. But in terms of, are you going to be limited to your zip code because in terms of what you can explore? And I think we should appreciate or think about how our current crisis is in giving us more opportunity to see that exploration. First of all, because many people we now see in the tech community are staying at home and working from their home, and they will never go back. Many of them will never go back into our urban centers. And as we build out our broadband for education, which is our paramount duty in the state of Washington, we will be expanding economic development. We will be expanding telehealth. We will be changing the way we're building out our communities. And if we're in this place for the next year or two, or however long it may be, we are fundamentally looking at many shifts in our society. One of the things that I think is exciting, actually, is that if you are a child in Quincy, where you're surrounded by agriculture as the main, kind of focus, and you want to be involved in the tech community, maybe you didn't have that opportunity to take an internship at Microsoft. You didn't before, but maybe you do now. You can be connected now. You can be, since we're all working this way. I really want to talk about and emphasize, don't let a good crisis go to waste, people. There's a lot of things that we can do because of this crisis that can come out better, that we can, transform for the better. And I'm excited about that. This this is one hell of a reset button. And we have an opportunity to do a lot of resetting in terms of how we approach education, how we approach the way, you know, we take care of one another for sure, and how we live and the opportunities that are there for people. Do we really have, in COVID, do we really have an urban-rural divide? Maybe not as much. Maybe those things can, you know, kind of be ameliorated because of the crisis that we're in. Let's be creative.
Take that charge. And Alyssa, I didn't know if you wanted to wrap up or have Dr. Petrie or Corey or Ashley all offer some closing words as we get towards the end, and then I'll do a final wrap up with some announcements. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say thank you all so much for connecting today. You can tell that I'm very blessed to get to work with this wonderful group of work group members. Not all of course, are on the call today. But I will put my email in chat in case anybody wants to talk further about the work of the work group. Please reach out anytime, and then I will defer to Corey or Paul or Ashley if you have any closing thoughts.
Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more. I'm just honored and privileged to work with this amazing team. I think that throughout our work, we've learned together, we've grown together, we've shaped each other's understanding. I think that we've pushed on each other. We've had good dialogue and understanding. So it's been a great learning opportunity, and just appreciate all of the experience and dialogue that we've had as a group or team. So thank you everyone today that came and chose to come to this particular presentation. We really appreciate your time, and onward in your passion.
Well, I guess I can jump in and just say, yeah, it's just been such a great learning experience for me. It's a great group. And as you can see, we have educators from all aspects of education in the state of Washington. And so this has been an excellent process. And actually today's been an excellent process. I've learned so much just reading some of the comments that are coming through, going to some of the websites, downloading some of the documents. And so I continue to learn about mastery-based learning. And I think it's going to be something that is very special for the state of Washington. And again, as I mentioned earlier, something that's really going to help with the engagement of our student population, and so that we have more students who are really taking advantage of their educational opportunities. So I just enjoy this opportunity to work with the Aurora Institute. And I mean, just attending your meeting last year really gave me a rich background on mastery-based learning. And so that's something I'm looking forward to be able to attend in the near future as well. So thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much to add. I definitely resonate with what has been said. But I will say that, I mean, as a student, it gives me a lot of hope that there are a bunch of adults who, you know, like believe that things need to change and are doing this work. And yeah, it, you know, it gives me hope as a student that, you know, there are things that will be changing in the future and that we can be a part of it. So I just really appreciate being able to lend a voice, and also, you know, realizing that there are so many other, you know, voices that need to be at the table. I am just one student with, you know, a very, and like I have my own experiences, but there are so many other students who have gone through different things. I think our schools are very much like siloed, and I think students are tracked into, you know, like different pathways. And I think it's important to make sure that, you know, people's voices are represented. So I think there's always work we can do there. But yeah, I really, really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this.
Well, thank you so much. The work that we do is about lifting up the great work that is happening in Washington State. And in other states, we're all learning from each other. This is incredibly humbling work, and it really is about the systems change. I resonated with the comments earlier on we cannot tweak an existing system that is working to rank and sort kids that is built on structural inequity. We are committed to carrying this work forward, and we're so grateful for you to be here and share the incredible work that is happening in Washington State in mastery-based learning, and also how you're thinking about broader pathways across K through 12 and post-secondary and beyond. It's such an inspiring vision, and we're grateful to be able to host conversations like this, and it wouldn't be possible without all of the work. And to everyone that participated today, thank you for sharing insights and resources and work happening in other states too. So we have the slides to go back up. We just want to give a last thanks, let you know that there is a survey that we could put in the chat. You can give us feedback. It's just 3 quick questions that will let us know how we're doing and what we can do to improve. So please consider responding to the survey. We really appreciate your feedback. And next slide, we hope that you will continue joining us for the virtual symposium all fall. There were some comments on internships, and so we have 2 upcoming webinars, one on October 19th on how schools are shifting to virtual work-based internships. So the mentorships that happen, whether we're face-to-face or within our high schools with students and advisors, has been critical. And we're trying to lift up and share the best practices for doing virtual internships for students too. So lots of other topics, and we look forward to hosting more conversations. And then the last slide, please. Keep in mind that we will be hosting a symposium virtually October 26th through 28th. So until then, we look forward to visiting with you virtually. Please let us know if there's anything we can help with for best practices in policy or best practices in research and practice on competency-based ed. And take care, be safe, and be well. Thank you so much.